we know where we get questions in paper 1. In C.R.E. paper 1, we deal with the Old Testament, We also deal with the African traditional heritage, and we apply the content of those two parts in the contemporary Christian life. So we have the content. How is it applicable to Christians today? And therefore, we have to know where the questions are set from, so that we don't beat about the bush when we are sitting for paper 1. We know the paper consists of 6 questions, where you are supposed to attempt 5. You are supposed to do 5 of them. Question 1, we deal with introduction to C.R.E. We also touch on the Bible, and creation and the fall of man. So for question 1, you expect to get questions from those 3 topics. And if we know that, we should know when you are getting into C.R.E. exam room, question 1 will come from those 3 chapters. Question 2, we test on faith and God's promises. By that, we deal with Abraham. We also touch on the Sinai covenant, and the main character there is Moses. So faith and the Sinai covenant. Question 3 touches on leadership in Israel. Here we have David and Solomon. But we should not forget there are other leaders. Samuel was the last judge, so a question can come touching on Samuel. Then the other part of question 3 is loyalty to God. And we deal with Prophet Elijah. Question 4 deals with selected Old Testament prophets and their teachings. Selected Old Testament prophets and their teachings. We also touch on Amos. It is very essential to note at this point that question 4, Moses must appear. I mean, Amos must appear. There must be a question about Amos. Question 5, we deal with Jeremiah and Nehemiah. Jeremiah and Nehemiah. Sometimes one of them is tested, and other times you might find both. So when you are preparing for question 5, don't assume you are reading one. Both can come. You may find question A is talking about Jeremiah, and the question B is touching on Nehemiah. Then question 6 deals with selected aspects in African religious heritage. Selected aspects in African religious heritage. There you deal with the African concept of God, spirits, and the ancestors. Then we also have the African moral and cultural values. The African moral and cultural values. At this juncture, we are sure that a great part of paper 1 tests on Form 1's work. Question 1 is based on Form 1 work. Question 2, Form 1 work. Question 3, Form 1 work. And question 6, Form 1 work. It is only question 4 and 5 where we touch the Form 3's work, a part of the Form 3's work. That is the prophets. So if you are to prepare very well in paper 1, you must be conversant very much with the Form 1's work. Many of the students assume the Form 1's work is not important, and they concentrate more on the Form 3 course, the Form 4 course. And that makes many of the students to fail. I also want you to take note of the following. C.R.E. as a subject has got very high candidature. Year in, year out, the number is increasing to the point that it is almost becoming compulsory. Many of the schools, it is compulsory, especially the Catholic schools. All the students must take C.R.E. Number 2, the pass mark is very high. From 0 to 34, that is a DE. While in some subjects, if you have 15 marks, you don't get an E. So you must pass very well. For you to score an A, you must get 90 and above in C.R.E. Number two, you must make the right judgment of the expectations of the examiner. Because if you don't interpret the question well, you will not answer it properly and you lose those marks. You may have the content, but if you don't get right the question, then you fail. Number three, we are saying that you must follow the rule of the rubric. The instructions given in each of the questions. I've said that in C.R.E. you do 5. If you answer all the 6 questions, the last one is not marked. And maybe it might be your best, so we leave it unmarked. Some of the questions will require you to give like 5 responses. If you give 10, we just mark the first 5. Then we are also saying you have to differentiate between the restricted and non-restricted questions. The restricted ones are those which give you the number of points you are supposed to give. If you are asked, give 5 historical books, you must give 5. The 6th one is not marked. We should also know the setting of the exams takes care of all students, those who are weak and those who are very bright. So some of the questions are very simple to take care of those who are very weak. Like 2016, the first question, question 1A, you were supposed to give 8 historical books. You just mentioned 8, and that was going for 80 marks. It is simple to take care of all the students. Those who are bright, if you want to get the 90, those simple questions, you must score everything. Number 5, when you are answering the questions, you do it in a continuous prose. Write in a continuous prose. Not unless when you are asked to state or to list, like the question I have talked about, give 8 historical books. Now there, you just state them. But the rest, you are supposed to write in a continuous prose. Then some of the questions will want you to compare when you are giving a comparison, you must bring out the similarity very well or the difference very well. That's why we are saying you write in a continuous prose. If it is a similarity, we must know you are talking about this one is found in this part and it is also found in the other part. Then number 6, we also have what we call the context questions, whereby you are given a question and you are given a part of the Bible. For example, you may be asked, give the consequences of sin according to Genesis chapter 3. You are not supposed to get out of the context. If it is Genesis chapter 3, we are dealing with that part alone. Genesis chapter 3 does not give us the consequence of sin as the lifespan was shortened. That one is found elsewhere. So you give that point, it is marked wrong. Although it is a point somewhere else, but it is out of the context. Then you must be conversant with examination terms. The examination terms we use in C.R.E. There are so many. You can be asked to list, to name, you can be asked to describe, you can be asked to narrate, to outline, you can be asked to identify, you might be asked to relate, to discuss, to explain, to compare, and to contrast. I want us to go through some of these terms and we see what they mean or what we expect in C.R.E. When you are told to explain, you are being asked to clarify or to illustrate the meaning of something. For instance, you can be asked to explain the challenges faced by Prophet Jeremiah during his ministry. The challenges. You explain. So here you are going to elaborate on what he went through. You give a meaning of the challenges he went through. You may be also asked to explain the significance of the rituals conducted during the naming ceremony in African traditional community. You explain. So yeah, you must know what took place and why it was being done, the significance. When you are taught to describe what are we looking from you, when you are describing, you are giving a picture of something, giving a picture of something. For example, you may be asked to describe the call of Abraham. Describe the call of Abraham. Now, here you must know the call, the event which took place, and you put it down. It does not necessarily require you to write everything as it is in the Bible, but you must know the events, and you let us now know. Number 3, we have discuss. When you are asked to discuss, you are debating on something. You are talking about something. You debate on something. For example, you might be asked, discuss 4 life skills used by Prophet Elijah to fight against false religion. Discuss 4 life skills used by Prophet Elijah to fight against false religion. So you are debating on the skills he showed while he was trying to deliver the message or the mission given to him by God. Then we have this word, relate. It gives students problems. To relate simply means to give a connection. Give a connection. And in most cases in C.R.E, this word is used when we want you to give out a story, maybe in the Bible. You may be asked, relate the call of Moses. You are simply being told to give out that story. It is the same as being asked to narrate. You just narrate. You give the account. You might be asked to narrate the making of the Sinai covenant. Relate the making of the Sinai covenant. So here we are telling you to give the Sinai covenant as it was. Compare and contrast. That one is very straightforward. You are giving the similarities and the differences. And here you must be very keen. For example, if you are asked to compare and contrast the 2 accounts of creation, then you write to me, God was the sole creator. There was food. God gave people food. You are not bringing out the similarity very well. You have to tell me that in both accounts, God was the sole creator. You can also say God was the sole creator in account 1 and account 2. The similarity has to come out very clearly. And also the difference. You might be asked the difference of the two accounts of creation. It is very essential to bring out the difference very well. Yeah, you write as if the examiner does not know. So you must convince the examiner that in account 1, this was happening, while in account 2, it wasn't. For example, you are supposed to tell me in the first creation account, there is no Garden of Eden, but in the second creation account, there is the Garden of Eden. And you repeat all those points. Every sentence, you must bring the difference. In account 1, this was there, but in account 2, it was not the case. In the similarities, you may be very brief. You may talk about in both cases. That one we accept. Because now you are telling us in the two areas, this one is what happens. And therefore, by answering such a question, you are not supposed to draw something. You make sure you write in a continuous prose. Then when you are asked to identify, you are being asked to disclose, to point out, or to single out. To disclose, to point out, or to single out. For example, you might be asked to identify the evils condemned by Prophet Amos. You identify, you single out the evils he condemned. Then we have some common mistakes or errors the candidates do, which must be avoided. Leaving blank spaces. Leaving blank spaces. Now, the time is enough for this paper. 2.5 hours. A candidate sitting in an exam room and returning the paper just as it was. We see these funny things. Ensure you write something. Number 2, don't exchange the question number. Never exchange the question number. If you are answering question 5 as your first attempt, you write 5, 5A, 5B, 5C. Don't write 1. Because if you give me answers for question 5 in 1, they will be wrong. They will be wrong. Never exchange the question number. And at that point, I should also say that you can start with any question. It is not a must. They follow from number 1 to the last one. If you are good in number 6, you can begin it as your first question, but write 6. Then students fail in C.R.E because they have poor content mastery. They don't know the content. I have said Form 1's work is very much essential in paper 1. How much do you know it? You must know the content. You must know the areas where we are testing you from. For instance, in Form 1, the first topic is what? Introduction to Christian religious education. The content we have there is the definition of the term and the reasons for studying C.R.E. And many students do not take that part seriously. If you get the paper for 2011, question 1 was give reasons why C.R.E. is studied in secondary schools. And it was 80 marks. 80 good marks. Last year, there was a question on that part. So, if you know that content, you must know the content well. When you go to the Bible, what is expected of us? We have to know the Bible as the word of God. We must know the human authors. And you should know those authors, some by name, and the books they wrote. You must know the major divisions of the Bible, the Old Testament and the New. You must know the Bible as the library. You must know the translation of the Bible from the original languages. You must know the versions of the Bible. And then you must know the effects of the translation of the Bible. So that content must be there. If you have to answer a question concerning the Bible, you must have that content and have it very well. Then the next chapter is creation and the fall of man. The content here is the biblical accounts of creation and their meaning. Biblical accounts of creation and their meaning. Here we have said you must know the first creation story and the second creation story. How they are similar and how they are different. You must also know the attributes of God from the biblical creation accounts the attributes of God. And it is also very important to differentiate the attributes of God in different areas. Because if it is in creation, they may not be the same as in another place, like the call of Abraham, the call of Moses, and the rest, the attributes of God. What we know about God from the creation accounts. Then, the teachings from the biblical accounts of creation, the teachings from the biblical accounts of creation. What can we learn? What do we learn from creation stories? And the main of the question, especially part C, will relate the content with the Christian life. So the question was, what do Christians learn about God from the creation stories? Then the traditional African aspect of evil. Traditional African aspect of evil. God's plan of salvation. God's plan of salvation. Similarities and the differences between the traditional African concept of evil and the biblical concept of sin. Similarities and differences between the traditional African concept of evil and the biblical concept of sin. So before we go to the exam room, we must have that content. Then the next chapter is faith and God's promises. Faith and God's promises. And our main character there is Abraham. So you have to know everything about Abraham. From the call, his background, the promises he was given by God, then you are also supposed to know the definition of the term faith in God. Faith in God. You must also know the acts of faith shown by Abraham. The acts of faith shown by Abraham. The promises God gave to Abraham and their relevance to Christians today. The promises God gave to Abraham and their relevance to Christians today. Then on Abraham, we also talked about the covenant. So we must know the meaning of the term covenant. We must know how a covenant is made, the elements of a covenant, and the covenants we have today. We should also know the comparison between the Jewish and the traditional African practices of circumcision. So that is Abraham. Then when we go to the Sinai covenant, you should also have the content and have it right. The Sinai covenant. Here we are concerned with the call of Moses. The call of Moses, the 10 plagues, the Passover, the crossing of the Red Sea, the challenges Moses went through, the making of the Sinai covenant, the breaking of the Sinai covenant, the worship of the Israelites in the wilderness, the 10 commandments, and finally, we have to know about the Israel's new understanding of the nature of God. This reminds me of one thing. You must be conversant with the Bible text. You must know the Bible. How will you know the call of Abraham? We get it straight from the Bible. Even when the examiners are marking, they must read the Bible. If the question is concerning the Bible, and they have to read the exact part. For example, we talking about the consequences of sin in Genesis chapter 3. We don't assume we know it. We sit and read. So you must be very conversant with the Bible. When we go to the leadership in Israel, we say we are concerned with David and Solomon. And the content here begins with the reasons for kingship in Israel. The reasons for kingship in Israel. And I had said, Samuel will still be included here, being the last judge before kingship system came. So a question may come concerning Samuel. Then we have the reasons against kingship in Israel, which we get it from 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 10 to 20. Then failures of King Saul. Failures of King Saul. I'm saying, though we are saying leadership in Israel, we are concerned with David and Solomon, we will find that other people are coming in, like Saul being the first king. We must know about it. We must know why he was rejected by God and the failures he had done, which led now to another king being chosen by God. Then when we learn about Saul, we should also apply it in our modern life, the Christian life. What can Christians learn from the failures of Saul? Then we have King David. On David, we have his achievements. We have David as an ancestor of Christ. We have his achievements and failures. He achieved and he also failed. So we must know that. We must know the qualities we can draw from him as a leader. What Christians can draw from King David. Then we have Solomon. And Solomon, we are supposed to know his achievements and his failures. And one of the achievements being the making of the temple. It is very important we know the importance of the temple in Israel. Then we have King Elijah, that is loyalty to God. We talk about King Elijah. And Elijah, you must have the content, and the content involves the reasons why idolatry was widely spread in Israel. The effects of idolatry in Israel. Then we have how Elijah fought against false religion and corruption. how he fought against false religion and corruption. We should also know the reason why he faced danger and hostility as a prophet of God. Then most important, the relevance of his prophetic mission to Christians today. The relevance of his prophetic mission to Christians today. Then the last part of Form 1's work, we touch on selected aspects in African religious heritage. Selected aspects in African religious heritage. Here we are concerned with the concept of God, spirits, and the ancestors. The concept of God, spirits, and the ancestors. Under that, the content we must have at our fingertips are the concept of God, spirits, and the ancestors, the African hierarchy of beings, we are talking about how the Africans understand the hierarchy of beings. We are also supposed to know the role of God, spirits, and the ancestors. The role of God, spirits, and the ancestors. Responsibility of the living. Responsibility of the living towards God, spirits, and the ancestors. We must also look at the traditional African ways of worshiping God, and the traditional African ways of venerating and communicating with the spirits and ancestors. Traditional African ways of communicating and venerating with the spirits and ancestors. Then the last part is the African moral and the cultural values. African moral and cultural values. Yeah, students are supposed to have a clear picture of the meaning of life and its wholeness in the African traditional society. The meaning of life and its wholeness in African traditional society. The African concept of community and the kinship system. The African concept of community and the kinship system. Then factors contributing to harmony and a moral responsibility. Factors contributing to harmony and mutual responsibility in ATS. Then we have also the rights of passage. Rights of passage and their roles. The African specialists and their relevance today. African specialists and their relevance today. African moral values. African moral values. And this will include honesty, hospitality, courtesy, integrity, tolerance, responsibility, love, cooperation, and unity. Then finally, continuity and a change in the African continuity and a change. In the African understanding of community or the age, land, property, widows, orphans, dress, dowry, medicine, and leisure. So if you have that content, you can tackle question 1, question 2, question 3, and the question 6 very well. But if the content is not there, you find you will have problems. You will have problems. The content has to be there. And the other part, number 5 and 6, it's about the prophets. The prophets. That is the Form 3's work, a part of it. You must know the introduction part. And here we are dealing with some selected prophets and their prophecies. Then we have Amos, Jeremiah, and Nehemiah. As I said earlier, question 4, Amos must be tested. But question 5, Jeremiah or Nehemiah or both. Or both. One thing I should also advise you is that these days they are coming up with not very simple questions. They are coming with technical questions. So you must understand the question. You read, you make judgment, and you make the right one. Remember, we have said they are looking at very high marks for you to qualify in C.R.E. So we must get each and everything right. Many of the students are confused. They write just anything. They don't interpret the question. It is very important you interpret the question. The time we are given in C.R.E. must be utilized well. You are supposed to read all the questions and you reread them again, critically making judgment now. You know which one is my best. You can have some time for that. You can set your time well. Plan that time very well. If it is a question 1, in question 1, how much time do I give it? This amount of time will be to read and to organize myself. You put down the points well, Paul. Then you transfer them. You transfer them and you do it very nicely. And as I said, if a question demands you give 5, you just do that. Don't waste more time giving very many points when the examiner will look at the first 5. The rest will be a waste of time, time which would have been used in another question. So I will also repeat, it is not a must you answer the questions the way they follow each other. You begin with your best, but never ever change the number. Because if you change the number, the question loses the meaning. And you get nothing, while you were supposed to get everything. Something else we also note, and mistakes done by candidates, there are those who wish to cheat. If you cheat, we index it, then it becomes bad for you. So you should avoid that. Prepare very well. I'm sure majority of you have are done with the syllabus, we are revising with whatever you have. You can trust in that. Then at that point, I can welcome some questions, if any. Something you want clarification?
Okay, we are going to start with our